Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day to fellowship with Yahweh and to fellowship with one another, to enjoy His presence in our lives and to study His Word, to know His will for our lives, and to learn how He wants us to live. Greetings to those on the DVD program. We pray that the messages are a blessing to your lives. Today's message is entitled War Against the Flesh. And I want to go to the scriptures and find out, where does this battle take place and what's going on in this battle that we can't see. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, starting in verse 3. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not fight according to the flesh. In some translations, it might say, we do not fight against the flesh, or we do not war after the flesh. This word is kata, and I think it is better translated, we do not fight according to the flesh, or we do not fight in the likeness of the flesh, meaning we don't fight with swords or spears or shields. It's a spiritual battle, and I believe he confirms that interpretation in verse 4. For the weapons we fight with are not fleshly. So he's not necessarily saying that we don't fight against the flesh. He's saying we don't fight after the similitude of the flesh, men's fleshly battles. For the weapons we fight with are not fleshly, but mighty in Elohim for overthrowing strongholds, overthrowing reasonings, and every high matter that exalts itself against the knowledge of Elohim, taking captive every thought to make it obedient to the Messiah, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is complete. I want to flip over to Romans chapter 6. And I spend a lot of time in these chapters, but there's just so much information here. You can get something out of it every time. Romans chapter 6, starting in verse 1. What then shall we say? Shall we continue in sin to let favor increase, or to let grace increase? Let it not be. How shall we who died to sin? That is the greatest concept to grasp in the following chapters. Dead to sin. How shall we who have died to sin still live in sin? Or do you not know that as many of us as were immersed into Messiah Yeshua were immersed into His death? We were therefore buried with Him through immersion into death, that as the Messiah was raised from the dead by the esteem of the Father, so also we should walk in newness of life. In the same way the Messiah died and was raised in newness of life, so also should we. For if we have come to be grown together in the likeness of His death, we shall be also of the resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man was impaled with Him. The context starting off in chapter 6 verse 1 was dead to sin. And he's given us an illustration of what that means here. In verse 6, knowing this, that our old man, our old way of life, was impaled with Him, so that the body of sin might be rendered powerless, to serve sin no longer. For he who has died has been made right from sin. If your old man has been crucified, and you have truly died to sin, you have been made right from it. And if we died with Messiah, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that the Messiah, having been raised from the dead, dies no more, death no longer rules over him. For in that he died to sin once for all. But in that he lives to Elohim. So you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, but alive to Elohim in Messiah Yeshua our Master. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body or your flesh. Therefore, do not let sin rule in your flesh, to obey it in its desires. Neither present your members, or your flesh, as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to Elohim as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness. Use your body as an instrument of righteousness. For sin shall not rule over you, for you are not under the law, but under favor. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under Torah, but under favor? Let it not be. He's going to go on to explain what it means to not be under Torah. 16. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves servants for obedience, you are servants of the one whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience to righteousness? Either you obey sin or you obey Yahweh. But thanks to Elohim that you were, past tense, servants, slaves of sin. Yet you obeyed from the heart that form of teaching to which you were entrusted. And having been set free from sin, you became servants of righteousness. I speak as a man because of the weakness of your flesh. For even as you did present your members as servants of uncleanness and of lawlessness, resulting in lawlessness, so now present your members as servants of righteousness, resulting in set apartness. For when you were the servants of sin, you were freed from righteousness. When you obeyed sin, you had no connection to righteousness. What fruit, therefore, were you having then, over which you are now ashamed? For the end thereof is death. The life that you used to live, you're now ashamed of. And the end result of that life was death. That's that old man that's been crucified with him. But now, having been set free from sin, and having become the servants, the slaves of Elohim, you have your fruit resulting in set apartness, and the end, everlasting life. You can either be a slave of sin, which results in death, or you can be a slave of Yahweh, which results in holiness and everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the favorable gift of Elohim is everlasting life in Messiah Yeshua our Master. Or do you not know, brothers, for I speak to those knowing the Torah, that the Torah rules over a man as long as he lives? For the married woman has been bound by Torah to the living husband, but if the husband dies, she is released from the Torah concerning her husband. He's explaining to us what it means to die, to sin, to not be under the Torah any longer. So then while her husband lives, she shall be called an adulteress if she becomes another man's. But if her husband dies, she is free from that part of the Torah. so that she is not an adulteress, having become another man's. So, my brothers, you also were put to death to the Torah through the body of Messiah, for you to become another's, the one who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit unto Elohim. There is a part of us that has died that causes us to not be under the Torah. The part that died was the part that wanted to live in sin, the old man, the old nature. And by that parting of the sinful nature dying in us, we're not under the Torah anymore, because the Torah doesn't point out sin in our lives anymore. For when we were, past tense, in the flesh, the passions of sins through the Torah were working in our members to bear fruit to death. But now we have been released from the Torah, having died to what we were held by. What were we held by? The passion of sin. So that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of letter. If we serve in newness of spirit, we shall fulfill oldness of letter. What then shall we say? Is the Torah sin? Let it not be. However, I did not know sin except through the Torah. You don't even know what sin is unless you know the Torah. However, for also the covetousness I knew not, if the Torah had not said, you shall not covet. We don't even know what covetousness is unless the Torah tells us not to covet. But sin, having taken occasion through the command, did work in me all sorts of covetousness. For apart from the Torah, sin is dead. And I was alive apart from the Torah once. But when the command came, the sin revived, and I died. And the command which was to result in life, this I found to result in death. For sin, having taken the occasion through the command, it's amazing. Sin took occasion through the command. It deceived me, and through it killed me. There's a law that tells me not to do something. When I see that, the rebellion inside of me automatically wants to rebel. And unless that law was there, I wouldn't have knew how to rebel. And that's where its strength came from. And that's the part that he's putting to death. The rebellious nature that wants to rebel against we know what is right. We know the Torah is right, but there is an old nature in us that wants to break it. And that's the part that gets crucified with him. Let me flip over to Galatians. I'm going to flip right back here in just a second. Verse 24. 5:24. And those who are of the Messiah have impaled the flesh with its passions and desires. The passions and desires in our flesh are crucified with him, and we are no longer under Torah, because the part of us that wants to break the Torah is dead. Back to Romans. Verse 12, 7:12. So that the Torah truly is set apart, and the command set apart, and righteous and good. Therefore has that which is good become death to me? Let it not be. But the sin, that sin might be manifest, was working death in me through what is good, so that sin through the command might become an exceedingly great sinner. The command was put in place to manifest what sin is. And it proves that what is in us is not good. And he goes on, for we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am fleshly, sold under sin. For what I work, I know not. For what I wish, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do. He's basically saying, I don't know what I'm doing. And what I want to do, I can't. And the things that I hate, that I do. And if we want to know the context of what he's going through, in verse 5, he says, for when we were in the flesh, past tense. He's explaining to us the battle. Verse 16. For if I do what I don't want to do, I agree that the Torah is good. And now it is no longer I that do it, but the sin dwelling in me. For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwells no good. For the desire to do is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I do not find. For the good that I want to do, I don't. But the evil that I don't want to do, this I practice. And if I do what I don't want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but the sin that is dwelling in me, that is, in my flesh. I find therefore this law, that when I want to do good, evil is still present. For I delight in the Torah of Elohim according to the inward man. But I see another law in my members, or in my flesh, battling against the Torah of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my flesh. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death, or who shall deliver me from this flesh that I'm dragging around? And then he answers, thanks to Elohim, through Yeshua, Messiah, our Master. So then, with the mind, I myself truly serve the Torah of Elohim, but with the flesh, the law of sin. So he can serve Yahweh with his mind if he chooses to do so, but his flesh, he has to bring his flesh into subjection. Let me flip over to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and then I'm coming back to Romans. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 26. Back it up to 25. And everyone who competes controls himself in every way. Now they do it to receive a corruptible crown, but we for an incorruptible crown. Controlling one's self is the context of what he's saying here. Therefore I run accordingly, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I treat my body severely and make it my slave, or I bring my flesh into subjection. I die daily, Paul said, so that when I have proclaimed to others, when I have preached this message, lest I myself might be a castaway or rejected. I have to die daily. I have to make this flesh obey me. I have to do it every day, or I myself might be a castaway. Romans. So he goes on to tell us in chapter 8, after we make this decision, who are we going to serve? Are we going to serve the flesh? Are we going to be obedient to the flesh who always wants to rebel against Yahweh? Or are we going to serve the Torah with our minds? Are we going to be empowered in our minds to bring the flesh into subjection? Chapter 8, verse 1, there is then now no condemnation to those who are in the Messiah Yeshua, who are in the Messiah Yeshua, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. If we are in Messiah Yeshua, we walk according to the Spirit. For the Torah of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua has made me free from the law of sin and death. For the Torah being powerless in that it was weak through the flesh. Paul said life could not come through the law. And that was because the flesh was weak. Elohim, having his own son in the likeness of flesh, of sin, and concerning sin, condemned sin in the flesh, so that the righteousness of the Torah should be completed in us. How does the righteousness of the Torah be completed in us? The old man has been put to death. The righteousness of the Torah can be fulfilled in our lives when the rebellious, law-breaking part of us is dead. So that the righteousness of the Torah should be completed in us who do not walk according to the flesh. Why? Because the flesh is rebellious. But according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the matters of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit keep their minds on things of the Spirit. And we know in 7:14 it says that the Torah is spiritual. For the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mind of the flesh is enmity towards Elohim, for it does not subject itself to the Torah of Elohim, neither indeed is it able. And those who are in the flesh are unable to please Elohim. Now, if we go back to the context that we were talking about in chapter 7, when he says, when we were in the flesh, here in chapter 8, he says, if you're in the flesh, you're unable to please him. So we know when and what he was talking about in chapter 7. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of Elohim dwells in you. Now, there's a Spirit of Elohim that makes his abode in us. That's why he says we are temples of the living Elohim. But the flesh can be a temple for a different spirit. And we're going to get to that. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of Elohim dwells in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Messiah, this one is not his. And if Messiah is in you, the body is truly dead on account of sin, the old man. But the Spirit is life on account of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Yeshua from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Messiah from the dead shall also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit dwelling in you. So then, brothers, we are not debtors to live. We are not debtors to the flesh to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you are going to die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, or the deeds of the flesh, you shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of Elohim, these are the sons of Elohim. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of Elohim, and if children also heirs, truly heirs of Elohim and co-heirs with Messiah, if indeed we suffer with him, in order that we also be exalted together. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the esteem that is to be revealed in us. Ephesians chapter 2. Starting in verse 1. Talking about that old man. And you were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once lived in the lusts of our flesh. Remember, Galatians talks about crucifying the passions and desires of the flesh. Among whom also we once lived in the lusts of our flesh, doing the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature, it was our nature to be the children of wrath, as also the rest. But Elohim, who is rich in compassion, because of his great love with which he loved us while we were in sins, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Messiah. By favor you have been saved. I want to flip over to another verse in Romans chapter 5 verse 8. But Elohim proved his own love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Messiah died for us. While we were living in open rebellion against Yahweh, his love was proved in that Messiah died for us while we were not worthy. Back to Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 17. So this I say, and witness in the Master, that you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having been darkened in their understanding, having been estranged from the life of Elohim, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. This word ignorance in the Greek is a lack of knowledge. The reason that the nations walked in the futility of their mind, the reason that their understanding was darkened, the reason they were estranged from a life of Elohim, was because of their lack of knowledge. Because of the hardness of their hearts. Who, having become callous, have given themselves up to indecency, to work all uncleanness with greediness. Now this callous is in the Greek is like become desensitized, not having feeling anymore. But in Strong's it says this is not necessarily in guilt, meaning the life that they always lived, which we just read was their nature, formed the callousness in them, which is not to be confused with Timothy. Let me flip over there real quick. 1 Timothy chapter 4. But the Spirit distinctly says that in the latter times some shall fall away from the faith, paying attention to misleading spirits and teachings of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having been branded on their own conscience, or having their conscience seared with a hot iron. This is different from people who were callous because of the way they lived their lives in their nature. In Timothy, these people fell away from the faith and became callous. And then those in Ephesians were callous because of the way they lived their life, their sinful nature. Anyway, continuing on. Who having become callous have given themselves up to indecency, to work all uncleanness with greediness, but you have not so learned. You have not so learned Messiah, if indeed you have heard him and were taught by him, as truth is in Yeshua, that you put off with regard to your former way of life the old man, being corrupted according to the desires of the deceit, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the renewed man, which was created according to Elohim in righteousness and set apartness of the truth. Therefore, having put off the false, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be wroth, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your rage, nor give place to the devil. Do not give the devil an opportunity. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, so that he has some to share with those in need. Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for the use of building up, so as to impart what is pleasant to the hearers. And do not grieve the set-apart spirit of Elohim, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption, stamped, marked. Let all bitterness and wrath and displeasure and uproar and slander be put away from you, along with all evil, and be kind towards one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as Elohim also forgave you in Messiah. Become then imitators of Elohim as beloved children, and walk in love as Messiah also has loved us and gave himself for us, a gift and an offering to Elohim for a sweet smelling fragrance. But whoring and all uncleanness or greed of gain, let it not even be named among you, as is proper among set-apart ones. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather thanksgiving. For this you know, that no one who whores, nor unclean person, nor one greedy of gain, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the reign of Messiah and Elohim. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these the wrath of Elohim comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partakers with them. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Master. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is well-pleasing to the Master. And have no fellowship with the fruitless works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of what is done by them in secret. But all matters being reproved are manifest by the light, for whatever is manifest is light. Galatians chapter 5. Starting in verse 16. And as many as walk according to this rule, peace and compassion be upon them and upon... Oops, I'm in the wrong chapter. Sorry. Galatians 5 and 16. Let's try it again. And I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do. Now that last statement is actually reversible on both sides. When you're walking in the flesh, the Spirit can call you, can draw you. Well, let me back it up. If you're walking in the Spirit, the flesh will try to draw you away. Okay? But on the other side of it, if you're walking in the flesh you've strayed away from Yahweh, that spirit will try to call you back. And there's a lust, it's a battle going on. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under Torah. And the works of the flesh are well known, which are these: adultery, whoring, uncleanness, indecency, idolatry, drug, sorcery, hatred, quarrels, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envying, murders, drunkenness, wild parties, and the like, of which I forewarn you, even as I also said before, that those who practice such as these shall not inherit the reign of Elohim. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no Torah. And those who are of Messiah have impaled the flesh with its passions and the desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Do not be led astray. Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. Because he who sows to his own flesh shall reap corruption from the flesh. But he who sows to the Spirit shall reap everlasting life from the Spirit. And let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due season we shall reap, if we do not grow weary. Ephesians chapter 6. Now, we've discussed the battle between the flesh and the Spirit, but this takes it a little bit deeper as what's going on behind the scenes. In verse 10, 6:10, for the rest, my brothers, be strong in the Master and in the mightiness of His strength. Put on the complete armor of Elohim, for you to have power to stand against the schemes of the devil. That, or some translations say, wiles of the devil. And it actually means the craft of deceit, the scheme of trickery. And when we think about the schemes and the craft of deceit with Satan, my mind immediately goes to the garden. And what was he trying to do? He was trying to get them to disobey. Why did he want them to disobey? Because disobedience brought death. Because we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against authorities, against world rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Because of this, take up the complete armor of Elohim, so that you have power to stand in the wicked day. And having done all to stand, stand then. And for the sake of time, I pulled out truth, righteousness, the gospel of peace, faith, salvation, the word, and prayer. And he starts this off in verse 10, be strong in the Master and in His strength. That's how we win the battle, in His strength. It's not ours, but we have to be armed. We have to be armed with truth. What is truth? Thy word is truth. We have to have faith, righteousness, the gospel of peace, salvation, His word, and prayer. James chapter 4. James makes it a little more simple on how to win this battle. James chapter 4, verse 7. So then, subject yourselves to Elohim. Resist the devil, and he shall flee from you. The Greek word here for subjection could be rendered obey. Surrender your will to the will of Yahweh. The word in the Greek for resist is stand in opposition to. Fight. Obey Yahweh, fight against the devil, and he will flee. That's a promise. So when is this battle going to end? 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Starting in verse 54. And when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your overcoming? And the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the Torah. But thanks to Elohim, who gives us the overcoming through our Master Yeshua Messiah. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Master, knowing that your labor is not in vain. So we see that we war against the flesh with our minds. We're warring against satanic influence. If we choose to obey Yahweh, He empowers us to do it. But the decision to do wrong is always there. The battle will not end until sin and death are destroyed. But thanks be to Yahweh, He's fighting the fight for us. Hallelujah.